Even as the White House unveils a more than $2 trillion infrastructure package, some progressives in Congress are saying that is not enough. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez believes that amount of money spread over 10 years will not nearly cover all that the U.S. needs to manage, including COVID.
Joining us to discuss, Democratic strategist, founding partner in Northern Star Strategies, Michael Starr Hopkins, and White House reporter for Real Clear Politics, Phil Wegman, our friend. Phil, let me start with you in terms of the rollout on this package. There's been a lot of questions. Joe Biden had previewed a $3 or $4 trillion plan. Joe Manchin's even on the record saying supporting $4 trillion. So this number came in much lower. What is the White House's expectation in releasing this and how it's going to go in Congress?
They know the political arithmetic. They're looking at the House and the Senate, and they realize that despite all of the wishes that they have personally, they still think it's going to be an uphill battle through the Senate. I think that while this is a very big number and we're dealing with trillions here, we can't get away from that. I think that their expectation is that this is something that they can do. But even then, I think what's interesting here is you have a debate between Democrats. You have some Democrats who want more. And then, like you noted a second ago, you have progressives who want much more. Meanwhile, there are Republicans who suddenly have discovered their limited government principles once again, and they're talking about spending as if it's an existential threat, as is their habit. But I think that what this reflects, and I know that there's a lot of discussion about the top line number, I think the larger question here is what is the driver of economic growth? Right. This is completely different than from what we saw, obviously, during the Reagan administration. It's a different vision than what we saw during the Clinton administration. Instead, the sentiment here is you can have government spend big. And we heard in the White House briefing room from one of Biden's deputies in the National Economic Council that they think, he said that interest rates are permanently low, and then he had to correct himself and say, we expect them to be low for some time because of structural forces. So it's going to be a debate over the top line here in the moment, but I think the larger, much more significant question, rather than just the massive amounts of money we're about to spend, is what is the function of government? And clearly it seems that conservatives and Republicans are on their back foot.
Yeah, I mean, Republicans are essentially irrelevant to this conversation. Not a single one of them is going to vote for it. And Michael, I do think AOC makes a good point here, which is that we basically just spent the same amount on COVID relief in 1 year. So now you're telling me $2 trillion over an entire decade, when even Joe Manchin was floating double that for infrastructure. And then the other piece of this that I even saw, sort of like neoliberal economists like Paul Krugman criticizing, is that they're going back to this deficit hawk mindset of like, we've got to pay for it all. So the $2 trillion is backed up by $2 trillion in tax hikes. Look, I support the tax hikes on the wealthy. They look like they're targeted in the right place. But it does seem like they're sort of returning to some of the historic thinking within the Democratic Party and even negotiating themselves down beyond where some of the most right-leaning members of the party actually are.
Look, at the end of the day, Joe Biden is a deal maker. At his essence, he wants to get a deal done. And $2 trillion is nothing to, poo-poo. At the end of the day, millions of Americans are going to get better paid jobs. They're going to get better training. We're going to get some infrastructure, some roads, some bridges built. This is a big deal. The Trump administration spent 4 years in Infrastructure Week and never actually got anything done. Yeah. So for the Biden administration to be winning when it comes to vaccines, to be rebuilding the economy and now getting infrastructure done all within the first 100 days, it's pretty impressive.
Let me ask you this, Phil, because this is where I'm curious around their calculus. Because as Crystal said, in terms of the $4 trillion number being floated by Joe Manchin, where is the uphill battle in the Senate? Are they looking at this as a reconciliation play? Because as I understand it, the price tag is not the issue. It's about the tax hikes, which that John Tester, Joe Manchin, Angus King, and others all have very different views on how to raise revenue within the Democratic caucus rather than the mainstream.
So yesterday, a senior White House official during one of those background calls that you're very familiar with, Sagar, was basically saying, we're not going to tip our hand. We are not going to say one way or the other how this thing is going to make its way through the Senate. But obviously, it seems that reconciliation here is the tool that's at Democrats' disposal to actually get something done. How that actually happens is going to be interesting, and I'm certain that there are a lot of people who spend quite a bit of time studying, the thinking of the parliamentarian and those Senate rules could explain things to us about whether or not this needs to be revenue neutral or not. But I think that, what is the difference between $2 trillion and $4 trillion? Not a lot when it's a talking point, but it is a lot when it actually comes down to the amount of money being spent. Sure. And I think that, to Michael's point, I think that this administration is more focused on actually achieving something. They know that this is likely going to be Biden's last big lift before 2022. Right. Obviously, there's another component to infrastructure spending. They're going to do a separate bill as well. But I think that they are focused on just getting something done, because when it comes down to it, it's a lot easier for them to sell a massive $1 trillion infrastructure project than saying, all right, we didn't get the whole loaf. We only got half.
Mm-hmm. But if this is the last big lift, then freaking make it a big lift. I mean, this is after the...
Spend. I mean,
Michael,
this is the Democratic Party.
After the relief bill, the whole narrative in the press was they learned the lessons from the Obama administration. They're not going to be worried about this deficit hawk mindset anymore. They're going to be focused on actually delivering what we need. And if you look at our infrastructure is rated D- right now. Just to get it up to snuff will take $2 trillion. That does nothing about preparing for the future with climate change and focusing on that in the way that is necessary. So again, I don't understand why. Okay, if your idea is we're going to have to get negotiated down, why are you negotiating with yourself first, offering a package that is half what even Joe Manchin suggested that we should do? It doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever.
Look, it's not the way I would have negotiated this, but I think they see the writing on the wall in terms of Democrats don't have a supermajority. We've got 51 votes, and it's going to be difficult to get anything passed if it's not something that brings over at least, one or two Republicans or can satisfy Manchin and Sinema.
Manchin wants $4 trillion. He wants $4 trillion. So start with 8 and negotiate down to 6. Why is this so high? I mean, seriously. And I have one more point I have to make, because this is more to respond to Phil, and then I'll let you finish. They spent endlessly after the financial crisis. They printed endless amounts of money to buck up the stock market, and they realized all the doomsday saying about interest rate, inflation, oh my God, it's going to be the end of the world. They know that that's bullshit, okay? We all have seen that that's bullshit. So what are you doing right now? Spend the money, get actual jobs created so that voters can see the impact in their communities and in their lives, and then see what happens with the political ramifications. Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, this is a little bit of electoral politics, because what they want to do is be able to show that they did infrastructure, but not have some more moderate Democrats come 2022 be tied with this kind of deficit argument and potentially lose the House, because that's really the ballgame. We've got to hold on to the House. And if there's a viewpoint among moderates and Republican lights that Democrats have come in and spent too much money, that's going to be difficult, especially in an off-year election.
I'm very dubious.
I have to say one other thing about that. Guess what the moderates are going to the mat for? For a tax cut for rich people. And with salt, which will blow up the deficit more.
No salt, no dice.
So the idea that they're worried, Josh Gottheim around here, no salt, no dice. So the idea that, they're so worried about being fiscally responsible, also total bullshit. Yeah. That's the last thing I'll say about this. Michael, go ahead. You can respond.
Go ahead, Michael. You can respond. Then we have to go. We have to do another one.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with you. It's an untenable position, and I think people like Gottheimer are responding to their constituents. Being in New Jersey, the salt deductions really helped people in Jersey. But across the country, people don't like the salt deductions because it's viewed as a elitist kind of East Coast, West Coast, rich people deduction.
Well, it is, to be clear.
Yeah, it's not viewed that way. That is the reality of what it is.
Despite the very angry messages I got from some New Jersey residents yesterday for poo-pooing it. Okay, stick with us, guys. We have a lot more to talk about. We'll be back for more Rising.